Okay, I think I'm going to get started. So first of all, I want to welcome everyone who's joined us this evening, and a particular thank you to our three speakers this evening. This is session number 6 in a series that we've been doing, and a lot of the faces I see this evening are familiar from people
Je
who've been with
reconnais.
us
Que vemos hoy son conocidas.
sessions. We're looking at different aspects of the Jewish world and of the Masorti Jewish world. And we're in the third section of our course where we're looking at the world around us, the environment around us. Our communities don't exist in a vacuum. Each of us is embedded in a country, embedded in a city. There are other people around us. There are other communities around us. Our communities themselves are very complex. There are older people, there are younger people. People have different political views, people have different social views, and all of us develop our communities in a very complex environment. What we want to do in this section of the course is to look at what's happening in the world around us and ask ourselves how those things should impact on our thinking as community leaders. There's 3 sessions. One of them is dedicated to what's happening in Europe. There's one session dedicated to what's happening in America, with the view that in Jewish things, many of the new ideas and many of the social movements start in America and then travel to Europe. And the third session is going to look at what I call the new religious movements, but the new groups, grassroots groups that are arising in our communities of people outside of the establishment who are looking at new ways to do their Judaism, who are perhaps competing with us and perhaps challenging us, and certainly should be making us think about what we're doing in our community. So we have 3 sessions. Tonight we're looking at the trends and the developments in European Jewry. We have 3 speakers with us tonight. Daniela Greiber is going to be our first speaker, and a few words of introduction before she takes the platform. Daniela, you sent me your CV, and you wrote in it that you've been in the you've been in this Jewish professional world for 22 years. And I was thinking that I first met you 22 years ago. When I became a Jerusalem Fellow, and you were working for the Jerusalem Fellows, and were probably the first person who received me into the program. But in any case, our paths have gone in parallel for a very long while. And I've always been impressed by your ability to kind of keep on top of everything that's going on around you. And you always have suggestions of things to read, and you have observations on things that are happening in different communities. And you were the first person I thought about for this evening. Daniela, her official title is in charge of the Jewish education program in the Rothschild Foundation. And as part of that work, you are in constant touch with dozens of different projects that are taking place in many different places across Europe. And I've asked you to reflect on what you see happening and what you see are the emerging trends as far as the Jewish community in Europe. So Daniela, please, it's all yours.
Thank you, Rabbi Chaim. I hadn't thought about it, but both our professional, personal lives indeed have gone in parallel for a long time. And thank you very much for having me here. So as you heard, I am the Grants Program Manager of the Rothschild Foundation and Hanadiv Europe. I've been with the foundation since 2013. And a lot of our work is around archives, libraries, museums, and universities, which mainly serve the general public. But I am responsible for our Jewish education program, which focuses on supporting the Jewish communities. And specifically, we support professional and volunteer Jewish educators so that they can have the skills and knowledge that they need to engage and connect more Jews with Jewish life, learning, culture, and heritage. I should say that I'm here on a personal capacity, so even though my remarks are connected to my work experience, they don't represent the foundation. So I've been asked to speak about the major trends impacting on the Jewish communities in Europe today, and what should we be doing to prepare our communities for the future. If these were difficult questions to address in 2019, now it's almost a year after the beginning of the pandemic, we are still far from identifying a new normal with reliable parameters that could help us frame some future plans of action. I'm not willing or able to predict the future. However, I will point to some factors that in my mind are playing and will play an important role in the future of European Jewish communities. I find it a bit funny that I'm telling Europeans what's happening in their communities, but I will still say the obvious. Europe is a very diverse continent. France is not Switzerland. Austria is not like Germany and Italy. Greece and Turkey are very different from the Scandinavian communities. However, I do believe that the following factors will be relevant in the future of all of these communities. The first one is revival and decline. The good news is that in most communities, there is tremendous creativity, commitment, and passion to strengthen Jewish life. I will put in the chat later on a link for you to see some examples of amazing European Jewish professionals who are doing incredible work all around the continent. Even during the pandemic, people have found ways to engage Jewishly, if not locally, as virtually. They're joining pop-up activities and international initiatives. Often initiatives that have emerged outside of the official communities are perceived as more welcoming and non-judgmental, particularly around halachic status and gender identity. The JDC, Moshe House, and the European Union of Jewish Students offer multiple opportunities for young adults to connect and experience different ways of being Jewish at a pan-European level. And Limud events have multiplied around the continent, helping people of all ages to advance their Jewish learning. The bad news is that most Jews are not taking these opportunities, and often young people feel that locally their initiatives are blocked by the older generation that holds on to community leadership positions, and they reject change. The focus of the activities that are taking place, I mentioned creativity before. One of the trends that European Jewry has imported from America, as Chaim mentioned before, is seeing Tikkun Olam, the repairing of the world, as the meaningful and positive way to express Judaism. Be it campaigning for the human rights of the Uyghurs in China, or supporting environmental causes, or advocating for equality. These are all commendable activities. However, they are not intrinsically Jewish, but rather universal. And while these causes might answer the need to find meaning for some people, in the long run, they are not likely to contribute to strengthen the community. A similar concern in terms of Jewish continuity is the focus on cultural Judaism as a way of identification. Jewish film festivals, the European Days of Jewish Culture, Budapest, and the Krakow Jewish Festival give opportunities for Jews and non-Jews to have a taste of a positive Jewish experience. However, if it's not accompanied by a commitment to accept the burden of making community happen, these activities allow people to tick the Jewish box, but do not build community. There's a quote that I like by Grace Lee Boggs: "Building community is to the collective what spirituality is to the individual." To build community, you can't only be a spectator. You have to commit with your heart and your intentions.
Чтобы построить общины, вы не можете быть
participation in religious practice, yet people are thirsty for personal connections, and being part of a community gives them the opportunity to support others and connect around life cycle events and celebrations. People also need hope and belonging, and that is something that Judaism can give them. During the pandemic, we have seen a surge in digital engagement with communal activities. New people are participating in virtual Kabbalat Shabbat, Havdalah. Even events like this one are attracting many more participants than in the past. The hierarchy has been disrupted. And to quote my colleague Sally Berkowitz's article, hot desk Judaism has arrived. Sally writes, the boss doesn't have the best window corner, the desks are usually the same size, and everyone makes their own cup of coffee. The hot desk Jew is interested in a range of people offering a multiplicity of answers. The rabbi will no longer be the arbiter of Jewish life, rather one of the many authorities that hot desk Jews might talk to as they create and curate their Jewish life. I'll also put a link to that article in the chat. Less money. There's probably going to be less money, both in terms of membership fees, philanthropy, and income from tourism. In countries like Italy, where the Jewish community members are very dependent on income from tourism, this has put a strain in the welfare structures of the community. People who regularly gave tzedakah are now receiving aid from the community. People are likely to ask themselves more and more, what is essential and what is superfluous? Communities that are perceived only as deliverers of service in exchange for payment will have to focus on their core purpose. They need to make people feel part of a human network, that they are needed and that their participation matters. The engagement of America and Israel with European Jewish communities. American philanthropy to Europe has strongly sustained the post-Holocaust revival narrative, combined with a concern for the race in anti-Semitism that sees European Jews as recipients of support and solidarity. American money has also supported the development of more inclusive and liberal Jewish communities and frameworks. However, in the foreseeable future, there is likely to be less philanthropic money. From another angle, Israel has come to terms with the fact that not everybody wants or can make Aliyah, and the Israeli government is investing significantly in Jewish education in Europe. Israel has already become the largest Jewish community. Marcelo, actually, who's going to speak after me, ran a couple of years ago a fascinating study about Israelis in Europe. Many Israelis are settling in Europe and creating communities, and some are even joining existing ones. Many Europeans have spent time in Israel and then they come back home in Europe. All these personal connections strengthen a two-way relationship that brings new ways of engaging with Judaism and with Israel. So, how do we prepare for the future? The future will be hybrid, a mixture of digital and in-person engagement. Jews will be able to access Jewish culture anywhere. On the first surface, the Jewish world will be super connected. Genealogy has grown a lot during the pandemic, with people connecting with distant relatives in other countries. There will be less geographical barriers, and people will be able to choose in-person or digital options of engagement for different needs. However, local communities will weaken if less individuals are committing to be part of the minyan, or joining the committees or volunteering at the Talmud Torah on Sundays. Communities will have to work hard to recreate the habit of going to physical services, to send children to Jewish education, and to prioritize leading an engaged Jewish life. On the plus side, hybrid engagement allows for new people to contribute to the community and offer skills that might not have been relevant before, such as video and production skills. Digital engagement helps people overcome stage fright and give their first Dvar Torah, like I did a couple of months ago. New people can be helpful also behind the scenes. We also understand better now what being isolated means, and we can be more conscious of being inclusive in all kinds of ways. Communities need to exchange information and learn from others. I am fortunate to have an overall view of what goes in different communities, and I really enjoy connecting people who are facing similar challenges or thinking of similar projects. There is tremendous value in encouraging members to develop their ideas from scratch. But virtual connectivity means access to amazing resources and people that are not available locally. And I encourage you in all of your communities to cooperate, learn, share, and inspire others. Ultimately, we want people to choose every day to be counted as a Jew. And continued Jewish learning is essential and fortunately more accessible than ever. Jewishly educated leaders keep our organizations and communities intrinsically Jewish and not merely agencies that serve Jews. Why does that matter? Because volunteer leaders and community members want a Jewish community that offers meaning and connection. Communities will only take being Jewish seriously if their leaders model a head, heart, and hands philosophy that is intellectually challenging, that facilitates spiritual search for meaning, and practical engagement with tradition, volunteering, ritual, and a general culture of stepping up. To paraphrase Avraham Yoshua Heschel, all of Jewish history can only pass to the next generation through us. Do we accept that responsibility? Thank you. I'll put the links on the chat.
Thank you very much, Daniela. You've really challenged us to think about the many changes that are taking place across Europe, and I can feel your connection with the many projects that you know so intimately and the communities that you know so intimately. We're moving over to Marcelo, and Marcelo is the Director of Research and Evaluation at the JDC in Barcelona. And as part of that, you also have familiarity with a lot of projects and a lot of communities, but also a familiarity with a lot of the numbers and the statistics of what's happening inside those communities. So I believe that you're going to start by telling us a little bit about that, and then draw your own conclusions from that. So please, Marcelo.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rabbi Haim, for having me here. I'm delighted to be here sharing some time with you. I cannot but being amazed, just a side comment, you know, it's been already a year of the pandemic, and you know that our lives were totally transformed by Zoom. And still I'm amazed by this type of meetings where I can connect with people all over Europe and beyond, it is amazing in a way. Probably the few positive aspects of these horrible times we are living in. As you said, yeah, I am just to complement what you said about me. I work for JDC. For those who are not familiar with JDC, JDC is an American organization that it was founded more than 100 years ago, in 1914, to bring help to Jewish communities around the world, and it has been operating in Europe for decades. In the First World War, after the Second World War, bringing help to the displaced person, the DPs, and more recently, when communism fell, JDC was very active in rebuilding Jewish life in post-communist countries. And in my capacity, I've been coordinating different research studies that we conduct within JDC in a unit that we try to monitor what's going on in different Jewish communities. These are our interlocutors, our partners, and we basically want to know more about what's going on there. So I would like to bring, I really share a lot what Daniela said. I think she said a lot of truth, and thank you for that. Maybe I can complement what Daniela said with some data, with some insights more from a sociological perspective that we are handling on an everyday basis at JDC. I'm not good at making predictions, as someone said, especially about the future. So what I'm gonna try to roll out here and put on the table are some trends that sometimes, you know, it's tricky to speak about trends because they are intertwined with narratives that are being held about what's going on, for example, about Jews in Europe. And probably I can touch on this. So let me share the screen. I prepared a PowerPoint. Let me, everyone can see, I'm going to put it in presentation mode. Well, you see the presentation mode, or you see the, here, okay. A few years ago, I always started this kind of presentations when I was asked to speak about Jews in Europe with this slide, with this dilemma or this question about, is it time for Jews to leave Europe? And the issue that Jews are bound to leave Europe, or that Europe is a spiritual wasteland for Jews, has been there for a long time. It's not new, and it started probably with the fall of communism, or with with people regaining interest in the continent, in Europe, as a place for Jewish life. And however, it had a momentum when the terrorist attacks in Paris in 2014, in Copenhagen 2015 took place. And again, a new big question mark was posed on whether the Jews had to leave Europe, or prognosis about Jews going en masse to Israel. So there was a strong narrative about Jews, about the future of Jews in Europe, and a negative one. The truth is that it's true. The worry, the preoccupation about anti-Semitism has grown among community leaders. It's not the same what they were thinking about anti-Semitism in 2008 and that in 2015 or 18. It's not the same, and I'm saying this years not by chance, because we run every 3 years surveys, periodic surveys.
Desarrollado encuestas sobre el tema.
About security and safety, and our data shows that anti-Semitism became a new normal, and it is placed in the agenda of community leadership, unlike 10 or 15 years ago. So, but the truth is that also that Jews are not leaving Europe en masse, that they are not doing massive aliyah as some prognosis said. And so if a couple of years ago I started with this slide posing a real question about whether Jews had to leave Europe or not, today there's a more nuanced view. Okay, yeah, anti-Semitism is worrisome, it's growing, it's on the rise. It's something that communities should take care of, and later we can discuss how they take care of. They can take care of. But at the same time, Jews are not leaving Europe, and perhaps this scenario of anti-Semitism is coexistent with something that Daniela mentioned, with certain revival, certain passion, certain vibrancy of Jewish life in the continent. There's an issue of demography as well, that it's looming among European Jews. Recently, the London-based JPR, Jewish Policy Institute, released a very, very interesting report about Jewish demography in Europe. Very serious. I recommend you to download that report. And basically, the message that the report conveys, or the issue of demography, is that even if Europe as a whole, it's probably the third pillar of Europe, if we compare it among Israel and the States, still the numbers in Europe are decreasing. And there's a problem with size. Many Jewish communities are lacking what we call critical mass, and this becomes a real problem in certain communities. There's a problem with aging. Communities are getting older, and there's a problem of low fertility rates. That this is not a particularity of Jews in the continent, but it's a problem of the European continent. Just to give you an example, I don't want to bring a lot of data here. I just bring an example. This is a population pyramid for Jews in Germany, taken from one of the last statistics of affiliated people in Germany. And I'm not, because I want to speak about Germany, this is an example, and probably this is the reality of many communities in Europe they are going through currently. But as you can see, this is what in the jargon of demography is called an inverted pyramid, where you find a population which is predominantly aging population, as you can see on top of the pyramid. You can see low fertility rates at the same time, and this speaks about, these are worrisome signs when speaking about the community, any community, not only the Jewish. It could be a country, it could be any population, And this is a reality that many Jewish communities are going through in Europe today. And this is a macro picture that we shouldn't forget when we speak about Jewish life in the continent. I have some better news coming. This is just an example. A few years ago, taking this into consideration, ECJC, which is a pan-European organization of Jewish communities, and JDC and Liatid organized on a regular basis a seminar for small communities in Europe, and to address these issues. Just to give you an example of how these issues are also being discussed within the communities and are trying to find solutions, creative solutions, to at least a structural problem, which is what it apparently is a demographic crisis. There's another issue, East, that I called East versus West, interrogation sign. And again, I'm speaking here from representing my organization, which is JDC. For many, many years, to say Eastern community was putting something, or was a loaded concept for us, which meant a type of community that was different to the West, a type of community because of the leadership was different, the resources was different, the history was different, of course, and somehow it needed a sort of investment that a Western Jewish community didn't. That was our assumption, or that was assumption/reality at the time. More and more we are realizing, because the natural passing of time, that less and less differences are between what we call Eastern European communities and Western European communities. And it's no longer, a shortcut saying Eastern European Jewish community. Traumatic history no longer defines the reality of the Jewish community as it did 10, 15 years ago. That's why maybe I chose this picture of Europe as a flat continent in a way, paraphrasing the flat world. And in fact, in our surveys, for example, the issue about anti-Semitism and security is much more pronounced in Western Europe than in Eastern Europe, which is an historical reversal. And many communities in Eastern Europe also are achieving economic self-sufficiency, something unthinkable 2 decades ago. So we need to be worried when we speak about it East and West, because it's no longer the same story. We need to be careful when we speak about post-communist, because sometimes when we use those labels, we don't shed the same amount of light as we did in the past. The other trend that I would like to put here on the table, is everyone familiar with the claims conference here? Maybe you can answer by chat, or I don't know if I can see the chat because I'm in presentation mode. But in a nutshell, the Claims Conference is an organization, a Jewish organization based in America, that basically was created in order to channel the money that the German government was giving in reparations to the Nazi victims. At the same time, the Claims Conference disbursed that money to all around the globe, to different programs supporting Nazi victims. Communities in Europe for many, many years relied on that funds to care for Nazi victims in Europe. And sometimes there were large budgets, the large amounts of money that also gave communities possibilities to run other type of programs, or at least take care of the overheads, as it is said. Well, this is going to, because of the law of history and the law of human nature, this is going to end more sooner than later, because when the last survivor dies, this will go end. This will go end. How do communities are going to care for the most vulnerable, for the people who are in need? This is something that needs to be discussed and reassessed by every community, especially in times when pensions are facing all over Europe a tremendous stress and a tremendous big question mark, because as you know, as I mentioned already, for the Jewish community, but also for Europe as well, Europe it's an aging society, so we don't have enough workers to support the retired people in Europe. So this is something that needs to be discussed among the communities. Daniela mentioned that the philanthropic money is going to decrease. I agree with that, but I have a positive message here. Today, we have a stable pool of funders in Europe supporting Jewish life. And again, this is very important, and we don't need to overestimate this. I don't want to mention all because I want to forget to mention one or the other, and and I don't want to create a conflict here. But they are a very important pool of funders supporting different aspects of Jewish life, from Jewish formal education to Jewish entrepreneurship, as Daniela mentioned, to Jewish education, etc., etc. And in the last years, we saw how these foundations and charitable organizations came together to produce what it's called meta organizations, or meta foundations, that take care and they focus on different aspects of Jewish life, such as formal Jewish education with FI, security with the Pillar Foundation, and Yesod with the Jewish professionals, and which is a joint venture between JDC, Rothschild Foundation, to take care of professionals and lay leadership, etc. So these are good news for Europe in a way. And last but not least, and it was mentioned by Daniela as well, diversity. Diversity has its downside. The downside, which is, there are lots of initiatives, very creative Jewish initiatives across Europe. These are only some examples, and if everyone cares about its own initiative, the question remains about the community. But there's, and I would like to point here diversity from two perspectives. One, diversity of initiatives. This is probably the thing we know the most, probably. Different types of grassroots, non-grassroots institutional initiatives that cater to different types of publics, from more cultural to more religious to young to older generations, etc. But the other type of diversity that it's less probably acknowledged, or it's starting to being acknowledged now, is the what I would say the internal diversity that coexists within a city. Daniela mentioned Israelis living in our cities, non-traditional types of families, not to mention, of course, different sexual orientations and collectives like LGBTQ. So our communities or initiatives addressing or building bridges between the different the diverse Jewish populations that we find in our cities today, in our European cities. So this is an interesting question that we should think about, because sometimes we are speaking on one hand about demographic, and we have very negative and pessimistic prognosis about the demography of Europe, but at the same time there are other demographies that probably we're not paying attention to, that it's we need to take care, or we need to address them. Not and probably, as we mentioned in that report that Daniela mentioned, not because Israelis need to belong to our communities, but maybe to find commonalities and share, across along the year, 2, 3, 4 activities or programs that we feel represents everybody. So I want to thank you. Probably there were, I don't know if there are going to be questions, or I failed in the part that to do recommendations for the future. but I'm open for discussions and happy to be here.
Thank you so much, Marcelo. Once again, you've opened my eyes. I've been a participant for several years in the activities of the ECJC, and I think that's first where we crossed paths. And I've always found that it challenges me to think in different ways, that I'm in my own world and I'm in religious communities and Masorti communities. And whenever I come to the ECJC activities and the work of the JDC, suddenly I realize that the Jewish world is so much bigger than myself. And I think that your main contribution is the big picture of seeing what's happening, not in the small community, but in the big picture across the continent. And thank you very much for that contribution. We're going to move on to our third speaker, and our third speaker is Joe Toledano from Paris. Now, France, of course, is the largest Jewish community in Europe, and it has a significant weight in European Jewry. And Joe has had a central position in the French Jewish community for many years. Joe, you sent me a CV, which is so rich and so long, and you've been so active within the community. So I'm not going to be able to mention everything, but I see that you've been active in Jewish education, and you've been active in the Jewish social welfare institutions in France for a very long time. I just want to highlight two. One is that you were the managing director of the Alliance in France for almost 10 years, and that's a very significant contribution. But more recently is that you're the president of the Modern Jewish School of Paris, which of course is the school of which Adath Shalom, our large Masorti community in Paris, is also affiliated with and part of, and is one of the founders. So you have a unique perspective on the social needs and the educational needs of the largest European community, and I'm really interested in hearing what you have to tell us.
Merci. Je suis ému et honoré de parler ce soir à votre invitation, Monsieur le rabbin Rainer. Et j'ai été très intéressé par les deux interventions de Daniela et de Marcelo, qui sont des interventions d'observateurs de l'Europe juive. Et effectivement, mon activité aujourd'hui de consultant en développement du leadership.
Today, I am on the one hand a volunteer, I'm very engaged, I'm a militant activist, and on the other, I work as a professional. For me, we're in a new phase of Jewish history, both in public life and in the history of Jews. For me, as a witness, I'm not going to be speaking theoretically, but I'm going to speak about what I see, how I see things. To be a Jew in France and in many other countries, in Israel, is to be able to meet up with other Jews, to be together with other Jews. To be a Jew by yourself doesn't exist. It's never existed. And no Jew can imagine living that way. To be Jewish is to participate in a minyan. To be Jewish is to be in a Jewish family, to have a Seder with your family. These things are difficult, if not impossible, by yourself. And it's true. We could have imagined a collective abandonment, just giving up as things got more and more difficult. In fact, what we've seen is the exact opposite. The difficulty we have in living now as Jews with other Jews, this absence, given the pandemic, has been met with such an extraordinary creative force and strength, both individually and with groups. Of course, we can't really have visibility on this kind of creativity, but this catastrophe that is the COVID has brought out an extremely useful and creative, generative commitment. I've seen this practically since the month of March, since the beginning. There's a real reflection about the future. We're investing more and more in education, although it has become more and more difficult. We're coming to the end of a generation of leaders in France, Jewish leaders in France and in other countries. We're coming to the end of that generation. They're arriving at the end of their time. And yet, at the same time, there are many initiatives, like from the Rothschild Foundation and from the Joint and from others, to promote young people, young leaders, and commitment. What I have seen, I've seen many very sad things, terrible things. For example, families who were unable to be there when their loved ones were dying. I've seen such terrible situations transformed into another kind of contact and relationship with other people. It's a new kind of community that's developing. There's a Jewish strength that is building, that is increasing, and a strength in Judaism. I think that in the years to come, Jews will probably be better off in a certain way than they were before, in a different way and progressively. But we're building toward this. I'd like to raise a few issues that we should be thinking about. For example, let me give you some examples. In Strasbourg, which is on the border with Germany, is a very old historic community. Already in the Middle Ages, they lived through the Middle Ages, the pogroms, the Shoah. Then the Jewish community was nourished by the arrival of Jews from North Africa, as well as some of the Jews from Eastern Europe with the fall of communism, and some Israelis as well. In this community, where there are all the diversity of questions that we have raised, the isolation of Jews, the fear of coronavirus, the deaths, because Strasbourg was unfortunately the place of many deaths very early on. There is nonetheless now a flourishing community, dynamic, all on Zoom, with intense participation, and it's their ability to create moments of encounters, of connection, to even to play games, to watch films, to talk. There are several dozen pages of activities available every month is very impressive, but also the number of people who flock to participate. The Grand Rabbi of Strasbourg told me, I didn't know there were this many Jews in Strasbourg. All the people I've seen in synagogues all these years, I have the impression that there are twice or three times as many than what I've ever seen in synagogue. For me, that is Joe Toledano, this energy is really positive and we must accompany it. Clearly, institutions are weakening and are in weakened situations financially for their budgets. All of the institutions in France, Orthodox synagogues. I am a member of the Consistoire of Paris, or the conservative, or the Masorti, or the liberal congregations. Clearly, they're all suffering. They're all weakening from budgetary constraints. And yet, everybody is continuing as if this is just a temporary situation. They will get through this. They will perhaps change, adapt, modify, but they will come through this. On the other hand, there are all of the learning institutions, for example, Jewish schools, who have resisted beautifully, curiously, between March and September, when we thought the Jewish schools would have fewer students for the new school year. We have seen 30 to 40% increase in demand, in requests for students to come join our schools. We think that a certain number of Jewish families have begun to ask themselves, what is the point of living if we're not going to be involved with what is essential? And what is essential is to give our children Jewish educations and to live Jewish lives. In France and in Paris, we have multiplied the possibilities for meetings, for encounters. Very impressive. Thursdays, for example, or the Kabbalat Shabbat, or the Havdalah, these rendezvous, these possibilities for encountering each other have been multiplied practically exponentially, and have many, many people faithfully participating. With the Rothschild Foundation, with the Joint, with other institutions, there's a lot of money. And yet the Jewish community in France, very curiously, has been able to create its own funding among Jewish donors. Curiously, Jewish philanthropists in France have been creating our own funding sources to get us through this crisis, so that Jewish institutions are not so weakened that they are no longer able to function. It's important that they continue to exist. And we have had response. People are stepping up. After the Shoah, most of the Jewish institutions had lost their heads, had lost their members. And the institutions recreated themselves, rebuilt differently So I think it's probable, I think it's most likely that as we get out of this crisis, we will see certain kinds of borders between communities be less policed. There will be more cooperation between communities, between movements. The École Moderne Juive is a great school, thanks in large measure to our directrix.
Et 20% qui viennent de familles Masorti ou libérales.
Has 80 Orthodox students. Here, I had a meeting with parents. There were 600 parents, and there was a significant percentage of Orthodox Jews, and yet I couldn't tell the difference. And we don't make any distinctions. Our school welcomes all Jews, and it's successful. Every one of us right now is in danger. We're all threatened. And because of the threat we are all under, and the threat we all are to each other, people are rediscovering the essential. We're going back to basics. We're holding on to what's most important. I want to say a word about Israel, America, and Europe. Jewish Europe, Judaism in Europe has been disappearing, has been going extinct in a permanent and continuous fashion for a very long time. And in a certain way, we exist because of this. We thought after the attack on the Hyper Cacher and the Jews in Paris, that all the Jews of France would flee. Not at all. Instead, the Jews of France demanded more of the state, demanded more protection of the state. And now the leaders of the government have spent their time, the leaders of the French government have spent their time saying, no, the anti-Semitism is not French. It's not acceptable. And this is new. We're not in danger as Jews in France. We're certainly in danger as Jews in the United States and as Jews in Israel. I think we have to change our ideas, be more careful about our ideas about what is dangerous. If any Jew is in danger, all Jews are in danger one way or another. We all face different dangers. We can prepare for some of them. We can reflect on some of the historic ones. Today, based on the kinds of meetings I've had with various people, let's think about how young Jewish students react to what's going on today. Generally speaking, students are sort of abandoning their studies given what's going on, except in the Jewish community. Jewish students are just about the opposite of this. Young Jewish students, 20 to 30 years old, are heavily invested in their study and in their professional lives. This is the contrary of what's going on around them. This is very interesting and creates a hope for the future, but also responsibility. We have a responsibility. So we have created there has been created a foundation to help Jewish institutions. If we have money today, should we put it into saving older people, both physically and spiritual, or should we invest in the youth, in our young people, so that they can have professional lives, so that they can get education? And of course, I am not going to say we should do one or the other. But it seems to me that what is becoming clear, increasingly clear, is that the Jewish community and its leaders are more worried by the danger that young people not get an education, not manage to have a career, and sadly more worried by that perhaps than by the older people who are in very precarious, increasingly precarious economic and social situations. This is true for non-Jews as well as Jews, of course. And we help people to the extent we can. And then we have the survivors of the Shoah, for example. But this is assistance. This is some kind of aid, but it's not the same level of investment. So I'm both confident, but not completely reassured for the immediate future, but later on, beyond that, what I'm hearing from the rest of Europe, I'm not so sure how that coincides, how that fits together with what's going on in France.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. We've heard 3 speakers and we've heard 3 very interesting views. And we're coming up to the end of our hour. And I'm tempted at this point, rather than opening the floor for questions, to just leave us with an observation, because each of the speakers was asked to reflect on what they see as the emerging trends, the challenges and the promises and the things that are happening in Europe today. And the thing that impressed me the most as I was speaking to, as I was listening to the speakers, is that each interpreted the question in their own way, but basically the challenges that we're facing as a continent, the challenges that we're facing as a community, can be divided into 2 kinds of challenges. There are long-term challenges and there are short-term challenges. And as I was listening to the speakers, I was writing down the adjectives that they were using as they were reflecting on each of those sets of challenges. So long-term challenges are very deep and very profound. We heard about a demographic decline and an aging community. We heard about a rising anti-Semitism, which even 15 years ago, we weren't talking about anti-Semitism in the same way as that we're talking about it today. We heard about a funding decline, mainly connected with the end of the era of the post-Holocaust reparations and communities needing to find new sources of funding and new ways of becoming financially independent. All of those are very deep and very profound problems. And when we talked about the short-term challenges, and of course the biggest of the short-term challenges is the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, and the shutdowns and the huge stress that it's put on communities, we had a completely different set of adjectives. The words I heard was innovation. I heard the word diversity. I heard about how communities were reinventing themselves. I've heard about members rediscovering and cherishing the value of community, the value of family, the value of being in person and together with the people who share our heritage together with us. And the adjectives we used when we're talking about how we're facing the challenges of the present are all uplifting and all promising, and all point to the fact that we together as a community have endless resources of hope, of creativity, of innovation. And what I invite you to do is to take the short-term view and apply it to the long-term, to take confidence from the fact that we've met challenges that we hadn't even dreamed that we'd be able to meet, that we've been able to reinvent ourselves, that we've been able to find ways of connecting with our communities. And we have to take that hope and apply it to the challenges that are 10-year challenges and 20-year challenges. And know that one of our speakers said, you know, the demography of Europe has been threatened for hundreds of years, of people talking about the decline of European Jewry, and still we're here, and still we're creating communities, and many of those communities are still thriving. And that's kind of a viewpoint that I'd like us to take from the meeting this evening. I really want to thank our three speakers, three completely different points of view, which covered a whole range of developments and a whole range of challenges from the East and from the West, from the large communities to the small communities. And they challenge us as community leaders to ponder those developments, but also to believe in ourselves and to know that Yahol Nuchala, we have the ability to meet those challenges and to prosper as communities in the future. It's just left for me to highlight that in 2 weeks' time is the second of this series. We're having two speakers from the North American Jewish community, from the American Jewish community, who are going to be talking about the developments and the challenges that they are facing. And again, the words that I said at the beginning, that many times social developments start in America and spread around the Jewish world. And it's a chance for us to perhaps peek into the future. No guarantee, of course, we're different, and there's no guarantee that we'll develop in the same way. But I think there's a lot to learn about how the largest Jewish community in the world and the most innovative Jewish community in the world sees the challenges that it faces, and the new developments and the new things that are happening there, and ideas that we can learn from. And in a month's time, we'll have the third session on the new communities. Once again, thank you to everyone for taking an evening of your time, for sharing your time with us, and look forward to seeing you back again in 2 weeks' time. Good evening to everyone.
Yishar kochacha.